Welcome to this program on behaviorism. I am going to talk about behaviorism in two parts. I will give an overview of the behaviorist psychology and its implications for theories of learning and how this behaviorism is applied in different situations of teaching and learning. Let me first talk about behavioral psychology, which is the study of external behavior. Behavior is an objective and observable, whereas what goes on in one's mind can never really be known or measured. Behavioral psychology thinks that the human mind is a black box. Behavior is the response of an organism to a stimuli. A stimuli can be anything that comes from the classroom or from outside, and the organism is the human mind. It's very interesting. The history of behaviorism usually starts with Pavlov. Many of us know what Pavlov did with dogs. And we used to joke about Pavlovian dogs whenever we had to crack jokes in a classroom situation. Pavlov, the Russian psychologist, discovered classical conditioning in dogs. What he used to do, he would ring the bell and the dogs would expect the arrival of the food. And when it was repeated, the dog started salivating, which means the bell gave the external stimuli and the food came, and when it related the ringing of the bell with the food, even when the food did not arrive, and if the bell rang, the dog used to salivate. So this is what is called the classical conditioning in dogs, perhaps in animals, and later on it was transferred to the human beings. Now there is another important behavioral psychologist, Watson, an American psychologist. He claimed that he can turn any infant into anything, a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, maybe a soldier, a general. And he said, give me a dozen healthy infants. Now we have to define what is meant by healthy, both physical and mental health. Well formed and my own special world to bring them up in, and I will guarantee to take any one at random and train him to be any type of specialist I might select, a doctor, a lawyer, artist, etc. It goes on. Now, this is the fundamental belief of the behaviorists. They can turn anybody into anything else or anybody else. In this, Pavlov's classical conditioning is a very, very fundamental premise. Classical conditioning explains some learning of involuntary emotional and physiological responses. The dog drooling when it smells food and later when it hears a bell. So this is classical conditioning. It is important for us teachers to understand, since the school is often the cause of unintentional learning through classical conditioning, especially anxiety, the text or the test anxiety conditions us to have a general school anxiety. Now it can be elaborated further. The way the classroom is structured, the way the teacher conducts the classroom, or the way the teacher chooses the strategies and what the students can learn. Now the context is very important. It's a classroom situation and the teacher gives the stimuli and the students respond to that stimuli and learning takes place. Now this is again based on Pavlov's classical conditioning. Before conditioning, the stimulus is unconditioned. It's a neutral stimulus. But unconditioned response will not yield much, and neutral stimulus will not get any stimulus. Now look at the other developments. Pavlov's classical conditioning operates in this way: unconditioned stimulus, neutral stimulus, then unconditioned response. And the next step is after conditioning, conditioned stimulus, say a classroom, conditioned response. So you control the situation, give a stimulus, and then expect a response which you want to have. It's very interesting that for a number of years, classical conditioning was thought to be very, very important. And therefore, kids who often get up, they clean their teeth, take bath, and then go to school. This is also part of the classical conditioning. When they go to the classroom, they hear a teacher, a roommate, a boyfriend, girlfriend, and they talk to you, and they engage themselves in a conversation which could be academic or which could be social. The point is, we learn to associate a stimulus with the response, and eventually our body does this automatically in the presence of the stimulus. Our response is involuntary. Now you can relate it how children behave, say in a home environment, in a park, in the company of their own peer group, outside the family and outside the class, and how they behave inside the class. So these are all some of the examples of classical conditioning. Classical conditioning can face extinction, where the learning is undone. For example, this can happen naturally, just as Pavlov's dog stops getting meat when music is played, or can happen through some type of therapy in the case of severe anxiety reactions. Example, people who are afraid to fly. We should remember classical conditioning is more than forming an association. It is an involuntary physiological response. That's very important. And then classical conditioning in the classroom is the focus. Playing soothing music, dimming the lights to calm and relax students are some of the examples of classical conditioning. For example, what is happening in this room before I started the presentation. The team came, they arranged everything, and they put the mic, and they put the machines, and then you get ready to make a presentation. And this is one situation of classical conditioning. And the same thing happens in a classroom after the bell rings. When the teacher arrives, all talk stops in the class. And when the roll call is over, then everybody expects that the teacher would now start teaching a particular lesson. And it goes on like this. So, unintentional classical conditioning is a different type. You have to test anxiety, maths anxiety, because maths is a difficult subject, public speaking anxiety. Even the best students, gold medalists, may not feel very comfortable with public speaking because it is a special kind of art or skill. General school anxiety. Suppose you are coming from your vacation after 2 months, and the coming Monday will be a day where you will express all your anxiety. You look for your uniform, you have to collect your books, your notes, and everything related to school going, and that is general school anxiety, and that also happening in a classical conditioning situation. Now, we have to look at some of the important implications of the classical conditioning for education. In part 2, I will cover some more, but here let me now see the implications of behavioral psychology or the behaviorist thought for education, at least in 3 different situations. In the classical classroom situation, classical conditioning can be seen in the form of the organization of the school or college or university, the design of the classroom, the roles assigned to the teachers, the roles assigned to students, what is expected of a teacher in the classroom and what is expected of the student in a classroom to do, and what is expected at the end of the session, that is you have to appear for the examination and you have to pass the examination, then the learning is supposed to be over. This is one kind of familiar situation. Now let us come to distance open education. Here behaviorist psychology operates in a number of ways. You set the objectives in behavioral terms. What is important is to decide what the student will be able to do, what the learner will be able to do. And we talk about this all the time. Unless the objective is measurable and observable, you cannot really make a very informed judgment about the choice of the content and the presentation of the content, the techniques of teaching. And therefore, at least at the undergraduate level, we insist on setting objectives in behavioral terms. What the student should be able to do after this. That's the main thing. Now, the same thing can be transferred to online education also. Whether you talk about online education or offline education, certain things are expected to happen. They are arranged, they are planned, and they are executed. And that's how teaching learning takes place. That, of course, is the main purpose of the behavioral psychology when it is applied in a educational situation. We will talk more about it in part 2 of behaviorist thought. For the time being, let us quickly recall that the classical conditioning is an important condition of behavioral psychology. Learning takes place under the classical conditioning situation, and learning is organized and it is seen in different situations like classroom teaching, open distance learning, and online teaching learning situation.